Richard the Film Geek here, and I'm here to give you guys my slightly belated official end of year ranking from my least favourite to my favourite of all 19 movies I either watched for the first time and or rewatched throughout the year that's just gone, 2025. Bear in mind, there is only going to be at least a couple movies from 2025 featured on this list, while the rest are mainly from past years. And I'm also just going to put this out there. If you happen to like any of the movies that I've ranked higher or lower on this list, that's perfectly fine. This is only just my list and thus all my subjective opinion. The 19 movies I'm going to be ranking in this video are as follows: The Hobbit Claymation, Your Imagination, Moose on the Loose, Thelma, Yesterday, Woman in Gold, A Walk in the Woods, the 2011 Borrowers, Cleaner, Mr. Magoo, the 2025 War of the Worlds, The Lost King, A Simple Wish, the 2006 Wind in the Willows, the 1924 Peter Pan, Military Wives, the original 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, The Critic, and The Red Shoes. So, as always, and without any further ado, let's hop straight into the list, and here we go. Starting off the list with a "It's you! It's you!" sort of bang. Right at the bottom, at number 19, is everyone's favourite film of the past year, War of the Worlds. And of course I say that with the bitterest sarcasm ever. There's honestly nothing else I can truly add to the conversation at this point that hasn't already been said concerning this literal piece of Martian shit, is there? Ever since this thing came out direct to Amazon Prime Video back in July, it's become only the second biggest social media punchline of 2025, only next to a certain MAGA freak Hitler in the White House. Critics and audiences have relentlessly torn it to shreds. It is already in the running to sweep this year's Razzies, and it has been memed and ridiculed to death. And all four of these things, by the way, very deservedly so, because this thing absolutely freaking stinks. Just the idea that Universal would make the conscious decision as they did to make yet another film adaptation of this timeless classic science fiction novel with absolute zero effort put into it, and then partner up with Jeff Bezos and Amazon in order to A, test out the found footage / screen life format, and B, try to cling on to the IP rights is just insane and pathetic. The fact that Ice Cube and the producers have still refused to disclose the budget for this thing, yet had the temerity to casually admit during interviews that this took only 15 days to make during COVID, and then blamed us, audiences and critics, for apparently, somehow, some way, misunderstanding their non-vision for this thing, to me, just could not be any more intergalactically laughable. Clearly no one involved gave a shit. The CGI for the tripods is still horrendous, even by video game standards. The acting is still atrocious and high school play-worthy. Richly directs with the exact same visual flair as one of his music videos. Ice Cube especially, with his meme-worthy reaction shots throughout this entire movie, as if he's watching an extended wrestling live stream on YouTube or something, gives an already legendarily, hilariously terrible performance. Move, bitch, get out the way and all. Easily the worst of the year. The various shout-outs to the likes of Amazon, Facebook, Tesla, Elon Musk, the Trump administration, Tucker Carlson, and Joe Rogan are just disgusting, embarrassing, and shameless. It's scary to think that this thing could potentially go down in the near future as a so bad it's good cult classic in the vein of The Room and or Plan 9 from Outer Space. And even if he were to watch this movie right now, I would very much like to imagine H.G. Wells himself doing violent backflips in his grave. Tripping his way blind to number 18 is the first 1997 film on this list, Mr. Magoo. Now, I know what you're probably already asking right now. Am I really proud in any way that I ranked this trash higher or think that it's any better than the last entry? Obvious answer, hell no. I do still greatly despise this movie. The only reason why this thing is where it is because this could have very easily stayed right at the bottom for the rest of the year had the last entry not somehow turned out even worse. To put it another way, we all know this movie is trash, okay? Not only that, but we also all know how especially offensively trash to the blind and the nearsighted this character is, let alone that stupid disclaimer that Disney slapped on at the end. I still don't understand why Leslie Nielsen and Malcolm McDowell signed on to this in the first place. I still don't understand what the hell Jennifer Garner was thinking starting her career with this. I still don't understand why Stanley Tong was unable to recapture here the same silly but fun and enjoyable magic he and Jackie Chan perfected a couple of years prior with Rumble in the Bronx. I still don't understand why these comedic action set pieces are so laughably and incompetently put together. And above all, I still don't understand why anyone at Disney at the time, even Michael Eisner, thought this was a good idea to begin with. But at least one thing's for certain. Thank God this ultimately backfired in their faces. And thank God James Cameron blew this piece of garbage out of the water at the box office. leaping its way into skyscraper action, or in this case, almost lack thereof, really. At number 17 is the second and final 2025 movie on the list, Cleaner. I mean, talk about such an insultingly generic, lazy, and boring time waster of an action film where nothing that much happens in terms of action, at least until the final third, where the talents of everyone involved, and especially that of Daisy Ridley, Clive Owen, and director Martin Campbell, are needlessly put to waste, where everything that could go wrong with an action film like this do indeed go disastrously wrong, and where you almost get the feeling that no one really tried or cared to make a semi-decent or good product out of this. Couple all of that with one of the laziest, uninspired, paint-by-numbers, formulaic and cookie-cutter plots you will ever hear in your life, unimpressive action set pieces, if any, an unexciting score by Tom Hodges, terrible pacing, and cardboard cutout characters, including a blander than bland main female protagonist who reeks of a combined cynical cash-in on both Rey from the Star Wars sequel trilogy and John McClane from the original Die Hard, an autistic younger brother character who is by far one of the worst misrepresentations of autism itself in modern media history. Even the actor sadly can't make this character work. And heck, even one of the worst henchmen turned twist villains in any action movie. And really what you get is yet another failed attempt by Hollywood at a female-led remake of a late 80s action movie classic that, at least for my personal money, deserves to be right up there with the 2016 Ghostbusters. Borrowing as opposed to stealing its way into number 16 is the 2011 Borrowers. The set design and even young Charlie Hiscock is literally all this thing has going for it. Aside from perhaps those two things, nothing else, and I mean literally nothing else about this adaptation of such a deservedly beloved, treasured, and timeless source material works. It is such a drab, dry, and lifeless film to look at. The ridiculous amount of high stakes and tension present in the books is completely gone here. All of the wonder, fun, simplicity, heart, wit, and charm of the story has been completely sucked out of it and replaced with a pseudo-dark, gritty and realistic soap opera feel that completely betrays the core purpose of the original story and what Mary Norton wanted to do with it. Everyone in the acting department, for the most part, is either horribly miscast in their roles, going through the motions, trying way too hard to be funny or over the top, and or disgusting disgustingly underutilized, with sadly the most unfortunate example of this being Aisling Loftus as Arrietty. The CGI is an obvious joke. Tom Harper's direction is non-existent. Ben Vanstone's writing is non-existent as well. And I've honestly got nothing else to add here that I haven't already said in my recent review, other than if this thing was genuinely your first proper introduction to the story of the Borrowers, and not the original books, not the 90s BBC television adaptation, not the Studio Ghibli film, and heck, not even the 1997 film, I'm afraid you're only doing yourselves a great disservice. Making a royal discovery in the number 15 spot is the first crushing disappointment on the list, being 2022's The Lost King. Even as a follow-up to their previous Oscar-nominated work on Philomena nearly 10 years prior, boy did Stephen Frears, Steve Coogan, and Jeff Pope completely drop the ball with this one. Which is especially such a shame because the discovery of Richard III's remains should have been a perfect true story to get right. But alas, what you sadly get here instead is a film that shoots itself in the foot, goes off on a few bizarre narrative tangents, completely misunderstands and misconstrues Philippa Langley's true motivations for why she wanted to unearth King Richard's body in the first place, and basically does a Henry VII itself and lies to the audience about who are the true unsung heroes and or villains of this story. And honestly, if it wasn't for Sally Hawkins being the only actor within this cast legitimately trying to give a good performance, this one would frankly just have been as disastrous as the last four entries. Hitchhiking its way through the Appalachian Trail and straight into number 14 is another crushing disappointment, and the first 2015 movie on the list, A Walk in the Woods. Perhaps aside from the decent soundtrack, and especially the Appalachian Trail itself being gorgeous to look at, what a painfully boring slog this was, let alone an uninteresting and unengaging one. You can definitely tell that this was trying so desperately to win Oscars. The comedy is embarrassing and painful to watch. The drama feels forced, unnatural, and artificial. Everyone within this cast, for the most part, is totally criminally wasted, especially Nick Nolte, Emma Thompson, Kristen Schaal, Nick Offerman, and Mary Steenburgen. Ken Kwapis proves that he was clearly the wrong person to direct this film. Michael Arndt, what the hell were you thinking with this script? The exact same year you helped J.J. Abrams to write The Force Awakens. And Robert Redford especially, may he rest in peace, not only feels terribly miscast as this movie's depiction of Bill Bryson, but also shows that he was clearly 3 decades too old for the role. And it's just such a colossal shame for Redford as well, that this ended up not being the big screen reunion with Paul Newman he originally wanted. But here we are, unfortunately. Surviving a global 12-second blackout and still miraculously remembering the Beatles in the number 13 spot is the first 2019 movie on the list, Yesterday. Very much similarly to The Lost King, actually, this one had potential and should very easily have worked. This had all the right ingredients to both get you interested and for it to be a good, interesting, if not great movie. A great director in Danny Boyle, an interesting cast, and one of the funniest, most intriguing, and bonkers premises I've ever heard of. But when you add Richard freaking Curtis into the mix to write your screenplay, a man who frankly has never written anything as interesting, intelligent, or funny as his Blackadder, Four Weddings, Notting Hill, and Mr. Bean days, then the whole thing almost completely unravels and falls apart like a house of cards. It feels much more like a Richard Curtis film than it does a Danny Boyle film in terms of tone, visual colour palette, and storytelling aesthetic. While Lily James may indeed technically narrowly save this film, as well as the entire iconic Beatles soundtrack, obviously, Himesh Patel is completely out of his depth as the lead, let alone the fact that you don't really give as much of a shit about their romance that unnecessarily takes up a majority of the movie. Joel Fry is basically a blander version of Spike from Notting Hill in this. Ed Sheeran can sing naturally, and he may indeed knowingly not take himself seriously here, but he frankly cannot act to save his life in one of the most egregiously blatant stunt castings of a pop star in film history. And don't even get me started on Kate McKinnon giving by far the worst performance in the entire movie. Even the initially promising uncredited cameo towards the end from Robert Carlyle as John Lennon feels incredibly tacked on and doesn't really go anywhere in the grand scheme of things. And honestly, what you're ultimately left with here is a film that blatantly misleads its audience, gives a huge middle finger to even the most hardcore of Beatles fans, and completely squanders, sacrifices, and abandons its promising premise in favour of yet another lazy, safe, formulaic and predictable rom-com plot that we're frankly getting sick and tired to death of at this point. Coming in at number 12 is the second and final 2015 movie on the list, Woman in Gold. This one is kind of remotely better than the last 3 entries combined, and thus, in other words, probably marginally the best of the disappointing movies on the list, but alas, not by much. Even despite Helen Mirren, Ryan Reynolds, and Tatiana Maslany trying to give it their absolute best with their respective performances, even despite director Simon Curtis's best efforts behind the camera, even despite Martin Phipps and Hans Zimmer's beautiful soundtrack, even despite the nice locales, and heck, even despite the suitably moving and emotionally riveting flashbacks to pre-World War II Vienna, this is still, unfortunately, a blandly beige and boring, kind of emotionally manipulative, and ultimately underwhelming mess of a film that really seems to suffer from an identity crisis and thus doesn't know whether it wants to be a period piece, an odd couple comedy, a character study, or an intense courtroom drama. Likewise, the amount of times this movie's portrayal of Maria Altman changes her mind every 10 to 20 minutes throughout the film, between wanting to see her case through to the end and getting her family painting back, and then not caring if the Viennese government gets to keep the painting after all, is so frustratingly inconsistent, because clearly Alexi K. Campbell couldn't be bothered to write an emotionally interesting or compelling conflict within her character, let alone sideline or relegate her to almost a supporting character within her own story. Speaking of this film's portrayal of the Viennese government officials as stereotypical moustache-twirling pantomime villains, the portrayal comes across as so incredibly offensively biased, one-sided, and disingenuous, without a single shred of complexity, subtlety, or nuance whatsoever. You can obviously tell how much the Weinsteins grossly interfered with this production by basically retooling it as this overly pretentious, desperately Oscar-baity rip-off of Philomena, and quite frankly, the quietly heroic and inspirational true story in itself of Maria Altman and Randy Schoenberg deserved a much, much better big screen treatment than what we got here. And thankfully, just like that, this brings to an end the ranting and or negative half of this ranking. Now we're finally on to the better and or positive half, where I get to talk about the good stuff. Thank goodness. Starting off with the first animated short film on the list, made by my good friend Harry Thomas, that just about missed out on a place in the top 10, which is Your Imagination, that he made in 2016. Granted, of course, I didn't technically make a proper review for this one after I saw it for the first time, particularly because one, it is just over 2.5 minutes long, and thus two, it didn't really give me anything that much to work with to do a proper review. That doesn't necessarily mean I enjoyed this one any less. I really like some of the impressive drawings that Harry does here of all the different characters, including himself, a bird, a knight, and especially a dragon that looks an awful lot like Toothless from the How to Train Your Dragon franchise. As well as greatly admire that he shot this one almost like a silent film, a live action Jerry's Game, in other words. Still very much the weakest of Harry's three short films, but I still liked it. Shabooming its way into number 10 is not just the second and final 1997 movie on the list, but the first and only guilty pleasure movie I reviewed on the channel, that being A Simple Wish. Yep, still not apologising for this hot take. I mean, yes, sure, for all intents and purposes, this is at least technically not a good movie. Yes, sure, it is kind of technically a nightmare of the most adorable proportions you can imagine. Yes, sure, the acting is generally kind of a mixed bag, with Mara Wilson, Martin Short, and especially Kathleen Turner giving decent and or standout performances. Yes, sure, the characters are pretty basic and thus not at all interesting or relatable. Yes, sure, some of the very first pre-Ice Age visual effects work here from Blue Sky Studios have aged pretty terribly by today's standards. Yes, sure, Jeff Rothberg's writing and Michael Ritchie's direction is messy and all over the place. Yes, sure, a majority of the comedy and some of the jokes do fall flat on their face. And yes, sure, this is especially nothing but cutesy fluff, purely for the sake of being cutesy fluff. But you know what? I still don't care. I still really enjoy how endearingly out there, bonkers, messy, silly, and ridiculous this movie is. The only best way with which I can describe A Simple Wish is basically like fast food out of Nando's, KFC, Burger King, or McDonald's. You know it's technically generally not good for you, but you still don't care because you're still drawn in by the taste. And even despite feeling a bit full in the mouth after a while, you still don't regret the experience of tasting that food. And with that little food-related analogy in mind, movies like A Simple Wish are so unapologetically, charmingly, and adorably bad in their own right. But you can still very much be perfectly fine with spending a rainy Sunday afternoon in front of your TV with your brain turned off and the cheesiest, goofiest smile on your face. Coming in at the number 9 spot is the second and penultimate animated Harry Thomas short film on the list, 2023's Moose on the Loose. Even despite its few obvious technical issues badly in need of improvement, a la the awkward stop-starty editing, lack of a distinctive original score, side characters not given the proper chance to develop, and lack of distinction between voiceovers of the characters, I will reiterate that this was just such a bold and daring step up from The Hobbit claymation, which I'll definitely be talking about a tiny bit later on, and pretty much solidifies Harry as a potential future filmmaker and or animator to watch out for. It has a real, genuine, sincere beating heart that frankly a large majority of feature-length animated films are sorely lacking. A likeable and relatable protagonist in Lucy Hoos, Man Russ, who is a suitably terrifying and scary antagonist, a lovely central relationship between Lucy and her mother that suitably provides the emotional backdrop of the story, and just really impressive looking and unique animation. Whizzing its way into the number 8 spot like Mr. Toad in a racing motor car is the 2006 Wind in the Willows. Even despite the underwhelming underutilization of the Weasels as main antagonists, this one is what the 2011 Borrowers, and especially the 2025 War of the Worlds, very easily should have been. Imperfect, yes, but yet still such a damn fun and enjoyable romp, as well as above all, surprisingly probably the most ridiculously faithful and accurate adaptation of the bunch to the spirit and the core message of the original book, especially with the beautifully handled and pitch perfect full inclusion / recreation at long last of the iconic Piper at the Gates of Dawn chapter. Plus you add into the mix a solid screenplay by Lee Hall, superb pre-Doctor Who direction from Rachel Talalay, fantastic main performances, and especially from the two standouts being Matt Lucas as Toad and Bob Hoskins as Badger, and some surprisingly technically impressive and unique minimal makeup and prosthetic work that instead of covering the actors' faces with animal masks, as was apparently the original intention, manages to make the actors look animal-like in a way that doesn't distract too much, while at the same time freely allowing them to express their facial performance as well as physicality through the makeup. And basically, granted that I've still yet to see and or rewatch most of the adaptations of this story, but as of right now at least, I'll probably go as far to say that this is the best adaptation of Wind in the Willows I've seen yet, and a shamefully underrated one at that in my book. Coming in next at number 7 was not just the first ever trip to Middle-earth on the channel, but also is the third and final animated Harry Thomas short film on the list. And that, of course, is his soon-to-be 17-part long claymation adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Hobbit. Well, technically more of a claymation remake of the live-action Peter Jackson films, but for all intents and purposes, still The Hobbit. Granted, of course, that there is only one more part of this film left to be uploaded on Harry's channel, hopefully sooner rather than later in 2026. But the fact that he's managed to put all of this hard work, all of this creativity, and all of this painstaking passion into making nearly 17 consistently engaging and binge-worthy parts to bring this iconic story to life in his own unique way, and all in the span of just over a decade at this point, is in and of itself an incredible feat. I mean, what else is there to say at this point? Really love the attention to detail on the character designs. Really love that Harry went to all that trouble to painstakingly recreate everything we like and or love about the films. Really love the background drawings of all the iconic Middle-earth locations we got to see in the films, including Bag End, Rivendell, the Misty Mountains, Lake Town, and the Lonely Mountain. Massive kudos to Harry for his impressively spot-on impressions of each of the characters, especially that of Gandalf, Thorin, Gollum, Smaug, and Bilbo. And just honestly, by far, the best Harry Thomas film of the bunch. Enough said. Singing its way to number 6 is the second and final 2019 movie on the list, as well as Peter Cattanio's spiritual sequel to his unlikely 1997 cult hit, The Full Monty, in the form of Military Wives. This one is every bit what Yesterday should have been. A lovely, heartwarming, emotionally poignant, and feel-good crowd pleaser of a film that is especially emotionally resonant with anyone who is going through a similar commonplace situation to the characters in the film, particularly in terms of losing and or having lost their loved one to armed combat, and the brutal futility of modern war in general. While not quite being as colourful and especially impactful as The Full Monty, it still manages to retain that near perfect balance of kitchen sink grit and urbane realism with hopeful optimism and down-to-earth humour, thanks to such a cleverly and intelligently written screenplay by Rachel Tunnard and Roseanne Flynn. Peter Cattaneo knocks it out of the park again with his direction for the first time in over 20 years, at least at that time. The performances all round are brilliant, and especially from the four standouts being Kristen Scott Thomas, Sharon Horgan, Amy James Kelly, and Gabby French, the personal unsung hero of the piece in my book. I also forgot to mention in my review that the musical numbers sung by the titular wives throughout the film, including Ave Maria, Time After Time, only you, we are family at the end. And even the big showstopper, Home Thoughts from Abroad, just beautifully tug at your heartstrings in just the perfect places. Not to mention a brilliant instrumental score from Lorne Balfe. Coming in with a poisonous pen to hand and a notoriously catty, cavalier attitude to boot, at the number 5 spot is The Critic. Obviously not to be confused with the American adult animated sitcom of the same name from the 90s. This is actually a 2023 feature film adaptation from Closer and Notes on a Scandal screenwriter Patrick Marber of the 2015 Anthony Quinn period thriller novel Curtain Call. Is set in 1934 London prior to the outbreak of World War II, and it tells the story of an openly gay but notoriously venomous theatre critic for the Daily Chronicle, who strikes up a sinister Faustian pact with a struggling actress who he has infamously worn and torn down with his reviews for years, which involves the seduction, psychological manipulation, and blackmail of his new boss in order to save his job. Basically, imagine Anton Ego from Ratatouille, minus the heartwarming last-minute redemption arc, if he developed the twisted, dangerously narcissistic and psychopathic personality of an elderly Tom Ripley. That precisely, in a nutshell, is Ian McKellen's character in this movie. In fact, if I were to honestly create an award for the best lead performance by a male actor, hell, even the best villain I have seen this past year alone, McKellen would easily win that award, hands down. Very much in a way like Peter Cushing's Dr. Frankenstein in the Hammer horror films, McKellen just relishes the quiet wickedness and despicableness of this character to a point where you almost weirdly sympathize with him and or root for him to get away with all the cruel, disgusting, and pure evil things he does in this movie. In fact, both his performance and that of Gemma Arterton are the only two standout reasons to watch this movie. Sure, the rest of the movie isn't quite as interesting and loses a bit of its gravity whenever McKellen is not on screen, but that is just pure testament to his and Arterton's dynamic, easily providing the more emotionally intense, interesting, riveting, complex, engaging, and compelling moments of the entire movie. Very much like The Dressmaker this time last year, 2024, this movie is delightfully dark, it is demented, it is tragic, it can be dryly comedic whenever it needs to, it is an interesting commentary on the nature of the art of entertainment criticism itself. It is a fucked up character drama slash horror story about such a reprehensible and unlikable person doing the most unspeakably shocking and terrible things to those around him is just almost everything you would want in a great thriller. Speaking of 2024, speeding its way into action on a mobility scooter at number 4 is the underrated but awesome sleeper hit of that year, Thelma. For an unlikely action comedy with a sweet, nonagenarian elderly grandmother in the lead, as opposed to a Jason Statham, Dwayne Johnson, or Tom Cruise, this concept easily shouldn't have worked. And yet indeed work with flying colours and thus prove any doubters wrong. It absolutely does. June Squibb is such a revelation in this role. The fact that it's taken her this long in her career to bag a leading as opposed to supporting role in anything is such a remarkable achievement that is never to be sniffed at. Also, the late Richard Roundtree, another amazing performance and such a lovely way to cap off such a legendary career. The other supporting performances, perhaps aside from Clark Gregg and Parker Posey, are also really good too, especially including Fred Heckinger as the lovably dorky but directionless slacker grandson, and Malcolm McDowell as the dodgy but slightly pathetic bad guy. Plus, what I love and greatly admire about this movie is, despite the fact that it was marketed as a conventional blockbuster action movie, it doesn't exactly go out of its way necessarily to meet the strict standards and expectations of a conventional blockbuster action movie, and instead takes full advantage of its small-scale limitations to convey this relatively sweet, poignant, relatable, and thought-provoking central message about spending as much time as you have left with your elders and not taking them for granted, as is often sadly the case in this day and age. And it's a message that particularly resonated with me personally, since a couple extended relatives of mine all happened to pass away this past year. And that aside, now on to the top 3. Flying its way from the second star to the right and straight on till morning, straight into the bronze position, number 3, is the very first and only silent film adaptation from 1924 of J.M. Barrie's immortal children's classic about the boy who would never grow up himself, Peter Pan, aka the version that purportedly inspired Walt Disney to make his much more iconic and arguably definitive animated feature film adaptation nearly 30 years later. Even despite some aspects obviously not aging well by today's standards, like the heavy-handed patriotic Americanisms, as well as some of the more questionable racial depictions, chiefly of the Indians, which is kind of a given and unfortunate common flaw at this point anyway, with most of the adaptations of this story. Still, what a wonderful and magical debut for this iconic character on the big screen this film was. It remains ridiculously faithful and accurate to the magic, the appeal, the spirit, and especially the childlike wonder of both the source material and the original stage play, whilst at the same time being daring and brave enough to take creative risks with the story and stand out on its own. Solid direction here from Herbert Brennan, rock solid performances from everyone, especially from Betty Bronson in the title role. Top-notch costume design as well as set design, production design and cinematography. Some amazingly impressive visual practical effects that were so ahead of their time. The fact that this one was practically saved from being a lost film and has regained its popularity with a brand new audience of silent film enthusiasts and or general film history aficionados, largely thanks to its continued online presence here on YouTube or elsewhere, is just awesome to me. If you're curious enough to find out where the boy who'd never grow up got his very first big screen start, there are countless versions of this film, with or without music, you can find here on YouTube that I'd definitely highly recommend you check out whenever you have the chance. Now, both of these top two I would technically consider to be my very first masterpiece reviews on the channel. And to be honest, I went a little back and forth in my mind as to which of these two I liked better, because any one of them could be my number one, and I'd still be perfectly happy. That and the fact they've both got the colour red in the title, that alone, funnily enough, makes them perfect candidates to be my top two. But on the educated and decisive flip of a coin, I ultimately made my decision. Cementing its rather unique place in stop-motion animation history as my number two pick is the OG Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer from 1964. I mean, seriously, what really is there left for me to say about this literal 52-minute Christmas masterpiece that hasn't already been said, and that I pretty much already said in my rather admittedly slightly lengthy 76-minute review of the film? There is a reason why this one continues to be revered and beloved over 61 years later as among some of the best movies and or specials to watch over Christmas. There is a reason why Jon Favreau was inspired to make Elf back in 2003. And there is a reason why this movie put Arthur Rankin Jr. and Jules Bass on the animation history map to begin with. This is one of the purest examples of lightning in a bottle. where everything you need to make such a great work of art that appeals to both kids and adults alike come together beautifully. Not a single moment here feels wasted, padded, or drawn out. The characters and story are given so much room to breathe and develop, and yet at the same time feels epic within such an unbelievably short runtime. The characters themselves, Rudolph, Hermie, Yukon Cornelius, Santa, Clarice, the head elf, the misfit toys, the abominable snow monster, etc., are just an iconic cast of characters in their own right, easily rivaling that of both The Lion King and Toy Story in my book, in terms of having probably one of the most indelible and iconic ensembles in any animated film. The story itself is just timeless and not just feels especially relevant to our current hellishly divided society, but is also very easily resonant and relatable to anyone who feels different from everybody else and or feels like they don't really fit in or belong anywhere, even despite not particularly aging well in some slight areas. The stop-motion animation here still continues to look fantastically unique, whimsical, charming, and magical. The songs, like the title song, have a Holly Jolly Christmas, We Are Santa's Elves, Silver and Gold, The Most Wonderful Day of the Year, There's Always Tomorrow, and my personal favourite, We're a Couple of Misfits, are still absolute bangers that you instantly hum and sing along to long after you finish the film, and is very much easily by far the most iconic soundtrack out of any of these Rankin Bass Christmas specials. Plus the legendary Burl Ives as Sam the Snowman, easily the best and one of the only two most iconic narrators of the bunch in these specials, only next to Fred Astaire as S.D. Kluger in Santa Claus is Coming to Town. I can honestly talk about this movie for an hour, if I didn't already do so this time last year. But all of the reasons I just pointed out, and so much more, is precisely why I genuinely believe the 1964 Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer is not just a classic, not just one of the greatest Christmas specials ever made, but one of the best animated films in general ever made. And at least for a little while, this was my number one. At least until last March, when I saw for the first time one movie that completely blew me away so much that it practically took the crown from Rudolph for the rest of the year, and thankfully has never been topped since. And my number one favourite movie I watched and or rewatched in 2025 is A Simple Wish. Again.
What?
Nah, of course I'm just jokingly trolling you guys there. Dancing its way into my heart as my real number one is the 1948 Powell and Pressburger ballet masterpiece, The Red Shoes. Once again, what's there really left to say about this literal work of art that hasn't already been said? If Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer was like the Snow White or Pinocchio of animated features, The Red Shoes is literally the live-action Fantasia. This is such a visually gorgeous, vibrant, and stunning feast for the eyes. The Oscar-winning instrumental score, as well as the Technicolor cinematography by Jack Cardiff, is off the charts. The colors, particularly the reds, just pop off of the screen like nothing else. The performances here are sublime, particularly from Anton Walbrook as the kind of villainous and morally ambiguous, but at the same time tragically complex, Dracula-esque ballet company manager Lermontov. Moira Shearer as the innocently naive ingenue Vicky Page, who just acts and dances her heart out here. Marius Goring as the outwardly sweet but inherently selfish and inconsiderate lover Julian Craster, who allows his intense rivalry with Lermontov for Vicky's affections ultimately lead to their collective tragic undoing by the end of the film. And even from Robert Helpman, prior to his role as the child catcher in Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Michael Powell and Emmerich Pressburger with their masterful direction and even just as legendarily masterful visual storytelling, it's literally almost like they can do no wrong. And what really put this film over the top for me, by far the best scene in the entire movie, is the iconic 20-minute reenactment of the Red Shoes ballet. Every time I watch this particular sequence, I am always left speechless and at a genuine loss for words. It is that breathtaking. It aesthetically inspired Darren Aronofsky to make Black Swan in 2010. It has since inspired countless generations of filmmakers to want to make their own films, especially including Martin Scorsese, who lovingly oversaw this movie's pristine DVD restoration alongside his veteran editor Thelma Schoonmaker. It proudly stands among the best of the very best British films ever made, and thus I am very proud to officially crown The Red Shoes as my number one favourite movie I've rewatched and, or in this case, watched for the first time in 2025. And believe it or not, guys, that is all 19 movies officially ranked, thus bringing 2025 to a final close on the channel. So don't forget to do the following few things as always. Leave a comment below. Let me know your thoughts on how I ranked each of the 19 movies on here. And also let me know how you would rank them from your least favourite to your favourite. Subscribe to my channel, click on the little bell to receive any emailed notifications and or updates from the channel. You can also follow me on Facebook, Instagram, and Letterboxd if you haven't already. Do take care, everyone, and here's to whatever 2026 has in store for us.